The morning sun slanted across the sprawling U.S. Navy training base, catching the edges of the mess hall in a golden glare. Inside, the air buzzed with the chaotic rhythm of hundreds of recruits. Trays clattered against stainless steel counters, voices bounced off the walls in a constant crescendo of chatter, laughter, and the occasional bark of a drill instructor. Amidst the chaos, Lieutenant Commander Riley Carter moved with a calm precision that made her almost invisible to the untrained eye. Her uniform was perfect, her posture impeccable, her gaze calm and analytical, scanning the room as though cataloging every threat, every opportunity. Riley had been assigned to oversee the new batch of recruits, a routine duty for most officers. But Riley was no ordinary officer. She had spent years in the shadows, operating in the world's most dangerous environments as a Navy SEAL. Every movement, every instinct was honed for life-or-death situations. And though she had traded field operations for leadership and training, those instincts were never dormant. Today, as she walked among the recruits, they saw only a composed, professional officer. Few could imagine the lethal skill she carried beneath that calm exterior. The recruits were oblivious to her presence in many ways, yet certain ones stood out. Private was one of them. Brash, overconfident, and perpetually seeking attention, he prowled the mess hall like a predator looking for prey, though his prey was often imaginary. When his eyes landed on Riley, curiosity tinged with arrogance sparked in his gaze. She didn't fit the profile of someone he expected to challenge or intimidate. She looked approachable, untouchable, almost ordinary. Perfect in his mind for a little test of boundaries. Nudged a fellow recruit and whispered something under his breath, smirking toward Riley. The words were inaudible over the din, but the tone carried an edge of disrespect. Most recruits would have ignored him, but Riley's eyes locked on him for a heartbeat, cool, unflinching, piercing. She didn't react overtly, didn't shift her stance, didn't even frown. But in that brief moment felt a chill crawl up his spine. Something about her calm, controlled gaze unsettled him, though he refused to admit it. Riley moved along the serving line, her tray held with steady hands. Every glance was deliberate, taking in the room, the recruits' postures, the subtle tensions that betrayed character. She could tell who was disciplined, who was reckless, who might cause trouble, and was already standing out in the way that only someone blind to their own arrogance could. He nudged her lightly as he passed, laughing, expecting perhaps a startled reaction, a scolding, or at least a show of deference. He got none of those. Instead, Riley's eyes met his for the briefest moment, and he felt the weight of her awareness. It wasn't just observation, it was calculation. Every muscle in her body was engaged, every instinct tuned to respond to threats. He stumbled slightly off balance but forced a smirk as though nothing had happened. The recruits around them didn't notice anything unusual. To them, Riley remained calm, almost serene, a picture of professional detachment. However, had unwittingly stepped into the first layer of a storm he could neither see nor understand. As she sat down at a corner table, Riley continued to scan the room while pretending to eat. Her mind worked on multiple layers, training schedules, recruit behaviors, and the subtle undercurrents of tension that ran through any group of young soldiers learning to coexist under stress. His movements, the way he adjusted his posture, the slight puffing of his chest, all of it was telling. He had tested boundaries with a shove and a smirk, little realizing he had triggered the instincts of someone who had lived through life-and-death situations that dwarfed his petty arrogance. Riley's thoughts drifted briefly to her SEAL training days, the long nights in hostile terrain, the moments when a single misstep could mean death, the hours spent reading an enemy before they could even make a move. It was a past she rarely spoke of, a past that informed every decision she made today. The calmness she exuded wasn't just discipline, it was survival. And today, she would allow to make his choice, knowing that choices had consequences. The mess hall continued its noisy rhythm. Recruits jostled, laughed, and argued, oblivious to the subtle duel unfolding between officer and recruit. Unaware of the storm lying beneath her composed exterior, whispered again to a friend, a new joke aimed at drawing attention. This time, Riley's hand rested lightly on the edge of her tray, her posture shifting imperceptibly, her body language signaling readiness. One wrong move, one thoughtless gesture, and she could respond with precision that would leave no room for dispute or misunderstanding. Her presence alone had begun to affect those around her. A few recruits shifted slightly, catching her gaze out of the corner of their eyes. There was a sense, unspoken and undefined, that she was someone to be watched, someone whose authority extended far beyond rank insignia or orders barked across the room. Riley didn't speak yet. She didn't need to. Observation, patience, and control were her weapons this morning, far sharper than any raised voice could ever be. Emboldened by ignorance, approached her table under the pretense of coincidence. He moved quickly, thinking he could startle her, provoke a reaction, or earn a laugh from his peers. But Riley's attention never wavered. She was ready, not just ready, but calculating, prepared, and waiting for the moment he overstepped, which he inevitably would. When he reached out, brushing her arm lightly as a joke, the reaction was instantaneous but imperceptible. She shifted him gently with a movement so smooth it seemed part of her natural posture. Stumbled back, caught off guard, his smirk faltering. A hush seemed to pass over his mind even if no one else noticed. Riley's calm gaze held him in place, silent but commanding. This was not humiliation, not yet. It was warning, observation, and control all in one. As she settled back into her routine, Riley's eyes continued to sweep the room. The lesson was already unfolding. Arrogance met with precision could be its own form of discipline. Unaware of the depth of the storm he had brushed against, straightened, muttering under his breath, a seed of unease now planted in his mind. The day had begun, and the calm before the storm stretched across the mess hall, charged with tension only Riley fully understood. The day in the training base seemed ordinary to everyone else, but for Riley Carter, every moment was a lesson in awareness. The morning sun had climbed higher, casting sharp shadows across the mess hall as recruits laughed and argued over scrambled eggs and toast. Riley kept her tray close, moving deliberately through the crowded space, her eyes scanning for potential trouble. She had already noted Private, the brash young recruit whose ego was as inflated as his confidence. She knew from experience that people like him didn't learn from words, they learned from consequences. Had spent the last hour whispering and nudging, testing boundaries, gauging reactions. The first nudge against Riley had only been a prelude. He thought he had been clever, a small act of rebellion against authority that would earn him respect, or at least amusement from his peers. But Riley didn't flinch. She didn't even tighten her grip on her tray. Instead, she assessed him, measuring strength, intent, and reaction speed. Her SEAL training kicked in silently, like a shadow that moved through her mind, calculating every possible outcome. Leaned closer this time, a whisper escaping his lips, something crude meant to provoke her. "Hey, officer," he said with a smirk, "you look like you could handle yourself in a fight, or maybe you'd cry." He laughed softly, nudging her shoulder with a deliberate shove, expecting her to react. Riley's response was immediate but subtle. Her hand shifted slightly on the edge of her tray. In one motion, she redirected his push, her body weight pivoting to unbalance him without a sound or a shout. Stumbled backward, nearly hitting the table behind him, and blinked in confusion. He hadn't expected resistance, especially not controlled resistance. The mess hall continued around them, recruits oblivious, laughing and chatting, unaware of the duel that had silently taken place. Riley's eyes stayed on him, calm but sharp. She didn't need to escalate further, not yet. Her training had taught her the power of observation and restraint. In one split second, she had assessed his strength, intent, and arrogance. Was reckless, untrained in situational awareness, and dangerously overconfident. If he tried to push her again, he would face consequences he couldn't imagine. Riley had handled threats like this in far deadlier contexts, but the lesson here would be tailored to the environment, controlled, precise, and unforgettable. Straightened, muttering under his breath, convinced he had only been brushed aside by chance. He returned to his friends, but his eyes never left Riley. A seed of resentment had taken root. He couldn't understand why a single shove had been deflected so effortlessly, why she hadn't yelled or flinched, why her calmness seemed almost unnatural. For Riley, it was a confirmation of her instincts. This recruit was testing boundaries, and his behavior would escalate if unchecked. By mid-morning, Riley had returned to observing the recruits during training exercises. She walked the perimeter of the obstacle course, clipboard in hand, her eyes scanning each movement, each expression, each minor slip of discipline. Moved through the course with brash energy, pushing others aside, ignoring instructions, laughing when someone faltered. She noted every action, every misstep, mentally cataloging how he interacted with his peers and how he responded to authority. It was not punishment, it was intelligence gathering. Later, during a brief break, Riley observed practicing push-ups in a corner, his form sloppy, yet his confidence unwavering. He puffed his chest, bragged to nearby recruits, and glanced occasionally toward Riley. She allowed a faint smirk to form, barely noticeable, but inside she calculated. Every arrogance-driven move he made was an opportunity to teach a lesson about respect, restraint, and the real consequences of underestimating someone. The calm of the morning had shifted into a tensioned anticipation, though no one else could feel it. Riley's thoughts drifted briefly to her SEAL days. She remembered a night in a hostile desert where a single misjudgment could have cost her team their lives. She remembered the weight of responsibility, the precision required to act without hesitation, and the patience needed to wait for the perfect moment. Was nowhere near that level of danger, but the principle was the same. Arrogance met with unpreparedness was always a problem, and problems had to be managed before they became threats. Meanwhile had begun plotting. He whispered to a couple of recruits, a plan forming to embarrass Riley in front of the mess hall during the next meal. He didn't know her background, didn't suspect the depth of her skill, and was blind to the storm he had already brushed against. Riley noticed his whispers, noticed the subtle coordination with his peers, noticed the slight tension in his movements. Every gesture, every glance told her he would attempt something again. By noon, the mess hall had quieted slightly as lunch approached. Recruits filed in, some tired, some joking, but eyes were fixed on Riley. She walked past him, tray balanced expertly, a subtle shift in her posture signaling awareness and readiness. He tried to nudge her again, thinking the first incident had been ignored, thinking no consequences had followed. But Riley anticipated it before it happened. Every step, every motion, every angle had already been calculated in her mind. When reached out, she pivoted her wrist, deflecting his hand with a motion too smooth to seem deliberate. He stumbled backward, tripping over the edge of his own tray, eyes wide in shock. For the first time, he realized that Riley Carter was not an ordinary officer. There was no anger in her eyes, no overreaction, just calm, lethal precision. She had made her point silently, unmistakably. Bravado faltered, replaced by unease he couldn't yet articulate. Riley continued to walk, her tray untouched by the minor collision. The recruits around them murmured quietly, sensing something unusual but not understanding. Muttered, glaring, his mind racing. He had misjudged her entirely. The storm had already been set in motion, and Riley's calm presence promised consequences if boundaries were crossed again. The day moved forward, but Riley's awareness never wavered. Every recruit's action, every footstep, every subtle gesture was noted, catalogued, and assessed. His arrogance had provided the perfect opportunity to demonstrate control, discipline, and restraint without ever raising her voice. And deep down, Riley knew this was only the beginning. The next move would define him, and the lesson he would learn. The afternoon sun glinted off the metal beams of the obstacle course, casting sharp shadows over the recruits as they pushed themselves to their limits. Riley Carter walked along the perimeter, clipboard in hand, observing every movement with the precision of someone trained to notice what others overlooked. Her calm exterior gave no hint of the storm of thought running through her mind. Each recruit was a puzzle, each motion a potential warning. And there, amidst the chaos of exertion and fatigue, was Private, moving with a reckless confidence that both irritated and intrigued her. barreled through the course, ignoring the instructions barked by the nearby drill instructor. He shoved aside smaller recruits, laughed when someone tripped, and adjusted his uniform with careless pride after every obstacle. Riley noted everything. She could see the patterns in his movements: impatience, arrogance, and a lack of situational awareness. He was physically capable, but mentally unprepared. Riley's SEAL instincts recognized the type immediately. People like him thrived on bravado, but their weakness lay in overestimating their own strength while underestimating others. She stopped briefly to watch as attempted the rope climb. He struggled for a moment, fumbling with the knots and losing balance, yet his pride kept him from asking for help. He glanced over his shoulder, noticing her watching, and straightened up with a smug grin. Riley's lips pressed into a thin line. Observation was a powerful weapon. He had no idea that every move he made was being cataloged and analyzed. Every misstep, every gesture of arrogance was a mark in her mental ledger. Riley continued walking, moving alongside the course but maintaining a slight distance to avoid interfering. She had learned that patience was often the deadliest weapon. The recruit who acted impulsively was predictable, and predictability could be exploited. Her mind replayed the morning's mess hall incident. Crude nudge, the whisper meant to provoke her, had been the first test, and he had failed without even realizing it. Today, she was gathering the evidence to ensure the next test would be unforgettable. Nearby, other recruits watched with a mix of admiration and caution. Some were impressed by his confidence, others wary of his recklessness. Riley noted these dynamics carefully. Leadership wasn't just about enforcing rules. It was about understanding how influence flowed within a group, how tension could be leveraged to maintain control. His behavior had created a ripple effect, and Riley intended to channel that energy in a productive, controlled way. Finally reached the monkey bars, swinging aggressively and landing awkwardly on the other side. His arms shook, and he stumbled, nearly falling into a mud puddle. Riley's eyes narrowed slightly. In another context, that slip could have been disastrous. He was strong, but strength alone couldn't compensate for lack of foresight. The young recruit didn't yet understand that the world she had come from rewarded precision, anticipation, and control over brute force. During a short break, Riley observed the recruits lining up to hydrate. Panting and flushed, approached a water station, smirking at anyone who looked his way. He whispered to two recruits near him, clearly plotting some form of mischief. Riley noticed immediately. His gaze flicked toward her once, almost challenging her silently. She returned his glance evenly, unshaken. Didn't realize that his challenge had already been acknowledged, stored, and analyzed. Every slight, every gesture, every moment of overconfidence was being recorded in the mental ledger that Riley had developed over years of covert operations. Riley's mind drifted briefly to the principles she had learned as a SEAL. Observation, patience, and timing were everything. In a high-risk environment, acting too soon could be fatal. Acting too late could be just as dangerous. Was reckless, impulsive, and arrogant, all qualities that made him predictable. He had shown himself to be a threat not just to her authority, but potentially to the cohesion of the group if left unchecked. She had seen similar recruits before, strong, confident, and dangerously unaware of their limitations. As the drills continued, his arrogance grew. He pushed harder, faster, careless of his form or the welfare of those around him. Riley adjusted her pace, maintaining a constant watch. She noted the subtle signs of fatigue setting in, the tiny miscalculations, and the slight hesitation in his stance as he swung from the horizontal bars. All of these were indicators, pieces of data she would use later. By understanding the patterns in his behavior, she could predict his next move. Her SEAL training had taught her to read body language like a map. Every gesture, every twitch, every microexpression revealed intent. Was oblivious, thinking he was clever. But Riley had already anticipated that he might attempt to embarrass her again during the next Chow period. It was only a matter of time before his ego pushed him too far. She didn't need to act immediately. She only needed to wait for the right moment. Riley's presence, though calm, began to affect the recruits subtly. A few glanced her way, sensing her authority and the quiet intensity she radiated. however, continued to behave as though he was untouchable. His gaze lingered on her occasionally, a flicker of uncertainty hidden behind bravado. Riley's lips curved into the faintest of smiles. She didn't need to move to maintain control. Her awareness alone was enough to keep him in check. By late afternoon, the obstacle course drills were winding down. Riley made a point to approach directly, her stride confident but unthreatening. She observed him closely, noting every reaction. He straightened, trying to appear nonchalant, but the tension in his shoulders betrayed him. Her calm voice cut through the din as she said, "Private, you need to focus on your form, not your attitude." Her tone was neutral, professional, but layered with authority. Froze momentarily, realizing her observation wasn't casual, it was deliberate. As the recruits filed out, Riley lingered near the edge of the course, watching and his small cadre of followers. Every movement, every conversation, every subtle gesture was being catalogued. She knew that sooner or later he would act again. The lesson had not yet been delivered, but the pieces were in place. His overconfidence had set him on a collision course with reality, and Riley's SEAL instincts ensured that when the moment came, it would be decisive, controlled, and unforgettable. By the time afternoon shadows stretched across the base, the tension simmering between Lieutenant Commander Riley Carter and Private had intensified. Riley had spent the morning observing him on the obstacle course, noting every twitch, misstep, and arrogance-fueled gesture. She knew what he was capable of: reckless confidence, physical strength untempered by foresight, and a complete lack of situational awareness. All of it spelled trouble if left unchecked. Yet Riley, as always, remained calm. Calm was her weapon. She didn't need to act immediately, she needed the perfect moment. Meanwhile, was unaware that his every move had been scrutinized, catalogued, and assessed. To him, Riley was merely an officer he could try to provoke, someone he could embarrass in front of the other recruits to cement his reputation. His friends encouraged him quietly, whispering ideas that would make Riley look foolish during the next Chow period. Smirked as he replayed the morning incident in his mind. She had deflected him, yes, but she hadn't reacted with anger. That had only fueled his belief that he could push further. As the recruits filtered into the mess hall for dinner, whispered to his cohorts, detailing a crude plan to corner Riley near the serving line. He would catch her off guard, humiliate her publicly, and prove that she was just another officer hiding behind calm authority. He imagined the laughs, the murmurs of approval from the other recruits, and the satisfaction of bending rules without consequence. What he didn't anticipate was that Riley had already anticipated him. Riley walked briskly toward the mess hall, tray balanced carefully in her hands. Her eyes scanned the room systematically, taking note of entry points, the positions of tables, and the likely paths would take. Every obstacle, every recruit, every minor distraction was catalogued in her mind. Her SEAL instincts, honed through years of high-risk operations, gave her a clarity that most officers didn't possess. She didn't need to worry about brute force. She needed precision, timing, and control. As approached the entrance, Riley noted his posture, shoulders squared, chest puffed, eyes scanning for the opportunity to strike. He was predictable. Every boastful glance, every small movement, every whispered word had been anticipated. She had already planned her response, calculated the angle, and prepared for the speed and strength he might employ. In her mind, the scenario played out multiple times in rapid succession, each iteration more refined, more controlled, more precise. Moved toward her with confidence, muttering under his breath, unaware of the calm storm watching him. To the other recruits, it seemed like nothing more than a casual walk past a superior officer. To Riley, every step was a piece of data. His speed, his weight distribution, his gaze, all were analyzed in real time. She adjusted her own stance slightly, shifting her weight, preparing for the first touch, the first shove, the moment he overstepped. Her presence radiated control without a single word. Even the most distracted recruits noticed the subtle authority in her posture. Riley didn't need to shout, didn't need to bark commands. The aura of quiet, lethal precision she exuded was enough to make the young and overconfident hesitate. However, had no such perception. He thought he had cleverly orchestrated the moment, but Riley had already orchestrated him into a controlled scenario. Every detail, every reaction, every possible angle had been accounted for. As they approached the serving line prepared to execute his plan, his fingers twitched, ready to brush against her tray or bump her deliberately. He wanted a reaction, anything that would give him dominance. But Riley had already shifted slightly, her body pivoting subtly, preparing to redirect any force applied. Her eyes were locked on him, cool and calm, yet behind that serenity was a mind racing with strategy, calculation, and control. She didn't need aggression, she only needed precision. Riley's mind briefly flickered to her SEAL training. Years in high-risk environments had taught her that patience was as valuable as speed, observation as powerful as strength. She had learned to read, to anticipate intentions, and to respond with minimal motion for maximum effect. His plan was immature, predictable, and reckless. He was walking straight into the edge of her awareness, blind to the consequences of misjudging her. As reach for what he imagined would be the perfect moment, Riley executed her strategy. With a fluid motion, imperceptible to most eyes, she deflected his hand, pivoted her body, and used his own momentum to destabilize him. He stumbled forward, barely catching himself on the edge of a table. To the other recruits, it appeared as though he had tripped. To Riley, it was exactly as she intended, a controlled demonstration of authority, precision, and consequence. His eyes widened in shock. His plan had failed before it even began. He realized in a fleeting moment of panic that Riley Carter was not a woman to be underestimated. She didn't need brute force. She needed only timing, precision, and observation. Every arrogance-fueled expectation he had carried into the mess hall shattered instantly. Riley's calm demeanor didn't just disarm him physically. It unbalanced him mentally, leaving him aware for the first time of the difference between confidence and true skill. Riley straightened her posture, her tray steady in her hands, as she scanned the mess hall for any potential distractions or additional threats. None were necessary. The lesson had already been delivered without a single raised voice. Retreated, muttering under his breath, humiliated but unharmed. Riley didn't smile or speak. She didn't need to. The subtle, controlled mastery she exhibited spoke louder than any words ever could. The other recruits whispered among themselves, some impressed, some terrified, none fully understanding what had occurred. Only Riley knew the full extent of her preparation, her anticipation, and the deliberate precision that had prevented a minor altercation from escalating. On the other hand, would not forget this moment. His arrogance had met an invisible wall of control, one that would remain in his mind as a warning. As Riley moved to a corner table, her mind was already analyzing what had just transpired. She would continue to observe, continue to guide, continue to ensure that his reckless behavior did not endanger others. Leadership required more than reaction. It required foresight, patience, and calculated action. And Riley Carter, with her SEAL-honed instincts and calm authority, was ready for anything the recruits, or life itself, might throw at her next. The mess hall was alive with the familiar din of clattering trays, shouted orders, and the low hum of conversation. The afternoon sunlight poured through the high windows, illuminating the long rows of tables filled with recruits. Riley Carter moved calmly among them, her tray balanced with effortless precision, her eyes scanning the room as always. Each recruit's posture, every glance, every small gesture was catalogued silently in her mind. She didn't need to announce her presence. Her authority was palpable, even in silence. Private was waiting, packing slightly near the serving line. His earlier plan had been carefully rehearsed in his mind, though poorly conceived. He was convinced that this time he would corner Riley, humiliate her in front of the others, and reclaim some twisted sense of superiority. He did not know she had already anticipated his every move, nor did he suspect the skill and discipline concealed behind her calm exterior. As Riley approached the serving line, squared his shoulders and took his step forward. The smirk on his face barely hid the tension in his hands. He reached out to bump her shoulder, intending to provoke a reaction. In that instant, Riley's SEAL instincts ignited. Every fiber of her body was alert, ready. Her mind calculated angles, timing, and the optimal response in a fraction of a second. She didn't panic, she didn't shout, she didn't flinch. She simply became a controlled force, waiting for the exact moment to act. His hand touched her shoulder lightly, expecting her to recoil or yell. Instead, Riley shifted her weight, pivoting her body with a subtle, fluid motion. The contact was redirected effortlessly, using his own momentum against him. Stumbled forward, his tray tipping, spilling food onto the floor. The room's noise masked the incident, so most recruits thought he had simply tripped, but knew. Panic and disbelief flashed across his face as he realized he had been outmaneuvered without resistance, without aggression, without a word spoken. Riley's eyes met his, calm but commanding. In that gaze was a silent message: "Do not underestimate me." Bravado faltered. He tried to regain composure, but his movements had become hesitant. Riley's presence radiated control, precision, and unspoken power. She didn't need to raise her voice. Her mastery of the moment was enough to dominate the situation. Some recruits noticed the subtle exchange and paused, sensing the tension but unsure what had occurred. Others whispered, intrigued and slightly afraid. The lesson was not lost on anyone who was watching closely. Riley had turned a potential conflict into a controlled demonstration of skill and authority. She had done so without a shout, a threat, or visible force, a testament to her training, discipline, and experience. Tried to recover, muttering something under his breath as he straightened his uniform. He attempted a second move, stepping closer as though he could challenge her physically. Riley anticipated it instantly. Her body shifted, her feet planted with perfect balance, her reflexes tuned for precise, controlled action. She intercepted his forward momentum, using his own energy to destabilize him. In seconds, he was off balance, grasping at the air, scrambling to avoid falling completely. The mess hall fell into a hush, the other recruits now fully aware that something significant was happening. Some backed away subtly, unsure of how to respond. Riley, however, remained calm, her focus entirely on. Her movements were fluid and decisive, every action measured, deliberate, and controlled. She wasn't being violent, she was being instructive, teaching a lesson that words alone could never convey. Finally came to a stop, flushed, breathless, and utterly bewildered. His arrogance had collided with experience and precision in a way he could neither anticipate nor resist. Riley's stance was relaxed yet authoritative, her eyes steady, her presence commanding. In that instant, he realized the full weight of underestimating her. His entire plan had failed before it even began, and he could do nothing about it. Riley did not gloat. She didn't yell or punish him in front of the hall. Instead, she simply allowed him to recognize his own failure. The lesson was self-evident. Arrogance without skill, preparation, or awareness led to humiliation. The other recruits absorbed the unspoken lesson as well. Respect, discipline, and attentiveness were not abstract concepts, they were survival tools. Muttered something incoherent under his breath, retreating to a nearby table. He was shaken but unharmed. Riley followed calmly, maintaining her authority, placing herself strategically between him and the rest of the recruits. She continued to observe him closely, noting every subtle reaction, every sign of mental unraveling. He had learned the first lesson. He would remember it for the rest of his training. As she settled at her designated corner table, Riley allowed herself a moment to scan the mess hall. Every recruit was watching, some curious, some in awe, and some quietly reassessing their own behavior. The atmosphere had changed subtly. The room was more attentive, more disciplined, even without Riley uttering a word of explanation. The impact of her controlled actions was immediate and profound. In the aftermath, Riley reflected on the moment internally. She had exercised precision over power, strategy over strength, and restraint over aggression. She had demonstrated leadership through action, showing that authority did not require shouting or violence. It required skill, awareness, and the ability to control a situation with minimal energy. Meanwhile, was left to process the lesson, humiliated and humbled, yet unharmed. a controlled demonstration of consequence without cruelty. As the recruits returned to their seats and the mess hall resumed its usual rhythm, Riley remained calm, her eyes subtly tracking movements. She had won the first battle without drama, without spectacle, and without raising her voice. Her SEAL training had guided every step, every motion, every thought. Had been a reckless recruit, confident and arrogant, but Riley had transformed the encounter into in control and authority. The stage was set, had been warned. Riley had established dominance. And though the mess hall had returned to its normal buzz, the air was charged with the quiet knowledge that underestimating Riley Carter came with consequences. For the lesson was personal. For the other recruits, it was universal. And for Riley, it was a reminder that even in the mundane setting of a Chow hall, her skills, her discipline, and her experience were always at the ready. The day's chaos had settled, and the mess hall had returned to its usual rhythm. Trays clattered, recruits joked quietly among themselves, and the low hum of conversation resumed. Yet the atmosphere was subtly altered. There was an unspoken acknowledgement in the air, a quiet respect for the calm authority of Lieutenant Commander Riley Carter. Even as she sat at her corner table, her eyes scanned the room, noting movements and attitudes, her presence alone commanding attention without a word. She allowed herself a brief moment to exhale mentally. Today's lesson had been delivered. Private, however, was not so composed. The humiliation of the Chow Hall confrontation still lingered, gnawing at his ego. He slouched at a table nearby, his hands tightly gripping the edge, and avoided direct eye contact with Riley. He muttered quietly to himself, replaying the moment again and again, each replay more frustrating than the last. For the first time, he realized that his overconfidence, arrogance, and lack of foresight had consequences that were not only immediate but also public. Riley remained calm, observing. She had no need to raise her voice or make a spectacle. Her authority had been established through action, and now it was reinforced by silence. The other recruits noticed. Whispers circulated, a mix of curiosity and awe. Some speculated about her background, wondering how an officer could neutralize a physically strong recruit with such effortless precision. Others adjusted their behavior slightly, subconsciously recognizing that Riley's presence demanded focus, respect, and discipline. Soon the base disciplinary officer arrived, a tall, stern lieutenant who had been briefed on the incident. Was escorted to a separate table, his punishment to be formal and thorough. Riley followed, walking at a measured pace, her expression neutral, betraying nothing. She had no intention of exaggerating or embellishing the event. The facts were sufficient, had challenged authority, misjudged his superior, and been corrected with precision. There was no need for dramatics. The lesson was already evident. Stood before the disciplinary officer, still flushed from the encounter. He stammered slightly, attempting explanations, excuses, anything to deflect responsibility. The officer listened without interruption, nodding occasionally, his eyes betraying a mixture of disbelief and disapproval. Riley watched closely, noting the subtle signs of guilt, embarrassment, and recognition in his posture. He had learned the first layer of the lesson, the personal cost of arrogance, but there was more to teach him. The reprimand was formal but firm, was reminded of the chain of command, the importance of respect, and the consequences of reckless behavior. The language was professional, measured, and precise, an extension of Riley's teaching philosophy. She had learned long ago that leadership was not about anger or punishment. It was about guiding behavior through clarity, consistency, and demonstration of capability. This moment of public humiliation was a tool, but the formal reprimand reinforced the importance of accountability. After the disciplinary session, Riley gathered the recruits quietly on the training grounds for a debriefing. Her tone was calm, steady, and professional, designed to impart lessons without humiliation. Discipline, she began, is not about fear. It's about understanding the consequences of your actions and acting accordingly. Respect is earned, not demanded. Situational awareness is not optional, it is survival. Those who ignore these principles will learn them the hard way. Her words were measured, deliberate, yet carried weight far beyond their simplicity. The recruits listened intently, some nodding, others staring, captivated by her presence and the authority in her voice. Riley did not single out, though everyone understood who had been at the center of the lesson. Her approach reinforced learning through observation and reflection rather than embarrassment, ensuring that the group absorbed the principles rather than fixating on a single incident. Leadership, she demonstrated, was about guiding growth, not indulging in petty revenge. Meanwhile, remained slightly apart from the group, silently absorbing every word. His previous arrogance had been replaced by caution, his overconfidence tempered by first-hand experience of Riley's skill and discipline. There was a flicker of understanding in his eyes, a realization that respect was earned through competence, restraint, and awareness. Riley noted this subtle change, though she made no comment. Recognition of mistakes and willingness to learn were indicators of potential growth, something she would monitor closely in the coming days. After the debriefing, Riley led the recruits through a series of exercises emphasizing teamwork, awareness, and controlled aggression. She paired recruits together, forcing them to rely on communication, observation, and mutual respect. Paired with a particularly disciplined recruit, struggled initially but gradually adjusted his approach. Riley's observation was meticulous, yet her interventions were minimal. She allowed mistakes, guided corrections, and encouraged reflection, reinforcing that consequences and learning were inseparable. By the end of the day, the recruits were fatigued but more disciplined, more aware, and more respectful of one another, and of Riley. The subtle lessons of authority, control, and consequence had permeated the group. Though humbled, had begun the slow process of. Riley's seal-honed instincts ensured that every action, every exercise, and every interaction was a calculated step in the ongoing education of the recruits. As evening approached, Riley stood at the edge of the training yard, observing the recruits returning to their quarters. She allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection. Leadership was more than issuing orders. It was about modeling behavior, anticipating challenges, and shaping minds without coercion. Had learned a lesson today that would echo far beyond the Chow Hall. The other recruits, too, had been quietly influenced. Respect had been instilled, not demanded. Control had been demonstrated, not forced. And in that subtle, quiet victory, Riley Carter reaffirmed her belief that true leadership required patience, precision, and unwavering presence. The base quieted as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the training grounds. Riley lingered briefly, watching and the others retreat, knowing that while today's lesson had been delivered, the journey of learning and discipline was far from over. Every glance, every whisper, every observation had been catalogued in her mind. Her SEAL training had prepared her for danger and unpredictability, but here, in the structured environment of a training base, her skills had proven equally valuable. The calm storm she represented was now evident to all, shaping the recruits in subtle yet undeniable ways. The sun rose the next morning over the base, its light catching the dew on the obstacle course, glinting off the metal bars and wooden beams. Recruits were already in formation, stretching and warming up under the watchful eye of Lieutenant Commander Riley Carter. There was no chatter today, no careless whispers. The events of the previous day had left their mark. Even the loudest, most reckless recruits moved with more purpose, more awareness. Every movement was measured, deliberate. Riley's presence had instilled a quiet tension, an unspoken acknowledgement of authority. Arrived last, still carrying the sting of yesterday's humiliation. His posture was different, less cocky, more cautious, but not broken. He had learned a lesson in control and precision, and while his pride resisted full acceptance, he was aware that underestimating Riley Carter again would be far worse. She didn't need to speak to command attention. Her calm, poised presence was enough to enforce discipline across the yard. Today's training was structured to emphasize situational awareness and teamwork. Riley paired recruits in ways that challenged their strengths and exposed their weaknesses. Found himself partnered with Sergeant Hunter, a disciplined and methodical recruit who had long understood the value of observation and patience. At first, resisted, trying to dominate the exercises through brute force and speed. Hunter, however, countered every move with patience and precision, forcing to adjust. Riley watched silently from the sidelines, her eyes cataloging each interaction, noting every sign of frustration, hesitation, or insight. Obstacle course was next. Riley's instructions were minimal but precise. Move with purpose, observe your partner, anticipate, don't react. The recruits moved into position and the course began, charged forward, ignoring Hunter's subtle cues and nearly colliding with a low-hanging bar. Riley stepped slightly closer, her eyes following every motion. She did not intervene directly. Instead, she allowed him to feel the consequences of impatience, straining muscles, minor missteps, moments of imbalance. Every error was a lesson in control, a reminder that skill required more than strength. As navigated the monkey bars, he hesitated for the first time, glancing at Riley. Her gaze was steady, calm, and commanding. He realized that she wasn't watching for mistakes, she was watching for learning. Every action he took, every misstep, every adjustment was observed and catalogued. Riley's presence reminded him that leadership was not about brute strength or loud commands. It was about awareness, preparation, and precision. Slowly, he began to adjust his approach, listening to Hunter's instructions, observing the flow of the course, and correcting his movements. Riley's influence extended beyond. The other recruits began to mirror her discipline, noticing her calm decisiveness and subtle corrections. She moved quietly among them, observing posture, technique, and focus. A recruit struggling with the balance beams received a gentle, precise adjustment from her, her words measured, her hands steady. No humiliation, no show of force, just clarity, guidance, and control. By example, she taught the importance of precision, patience, and situational awareness. During a water break, Riley called the recruits together for a short debrief. Her tone was calm but carried authority. "Confidence without control is dangerous," she said. "Strength without observation is useless. Learn to anticipate, not just react. Respect your partner, respect your environment, and respect yourself." The recruits nodded, many silently reflecting on her words. Listened carefully, his pride bruised but his mind opening to the principles she was demonstrating. He understood that yesterday had been only the first lesson. Today was the continuation, a test of his ability to internalize discipline. The next drill emphasized teamwork and adaptability. Riley set up a scenario in which recruits had to navigate the course blindfolded, guided only by their partner's voice. Panic and miscommunication erupted initially, but paired with Hunter, gradually adapted. Riley observed every exchange, noting the subtle cues began to recognize: tone, timing, spatial awareness. He hesitated less, adjusted faster, and began to understand that control came not from dominance but from awareness and cooperation. By mid-afternoon, Riley intensified the training further, introducing situational simulations that required quick thinking under pressure. Recruits were instructed to anticipate obstacles, identify potential hazards, and respond with calm precision. Initially faltered, his old habits of forceful reaction resurfacing, but the presence of Riley, her unwavering calm and quiet authority, guided him back to focus. Slowly, he began to see the value of observation, patience, and controlled execution. Riley's own experience as a SEAL informed every aspect of the training. She demonstrated subtle techniques for balance, leverage, and spatial awareness without ever appearing forceful. She corrected recruits gently but decisively, always reinforcing learning over punishment. Her approach was meticulous, blending skill, anticipation, and psychological insight. By the end of the day, the recruits were not only physically challenged but mentally sharpened, their respect for Riley growing with every interaction. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the base, Riley gathered the recruits for a final review. Discipline is not about fear. It is about understanding consequences before they happen. Awareness is your greatest weapon. Confidence without preparation will fail you every time. Her gaze swept across the group, lingering briefly on who met her eyes with a mixture of humility and determination. He was beginning to understand that true strength required more than physical capability. It required control, observation, and respect. The training yard was quieting as the recruits filed out, exhausted but alert. Riley remained standing, observing every movement, every posture, every gesture. The day had been challenging, both physically and mentally, but the lessons had been absorbed, had grown visibly, his arrogance tempered by experience, his confidence guided by awareness. The other recruits had begun to internalize the importance of discipline, cooperation, and observation. Riley's subtle influence had reshaped the dynamics of the group, establishing her authority not through fear, but through skill and example. By the time the base lights flickered on, signaling the end of training, Riley allowed herself a brief moment of satisfaction. Today had been about more than drills, it had been about transformation. And the other recruits had begun to grasp the principles she had long lived by: awareness, precision, patience, and control. As she walked to her quarters, she knew that tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to shape the next generation. But for now, the foundation had been laid. The storm of discipline, subtly and quietly imposed, had begun. The next morning dawned crisp and bright over the training base. Recruits filed out of their quarters, their movements sharper, more disciplined, and more deliberate than the day before. Lieutenant Commander Riley Carter observed from the edge of the training yard, her calm, composed presence radiating authority. She didn't need to bark orders. Her very stance, the precise alignment of her uniform, the measured pace of her walk, commanded attention. Every recruit, even those who had laughed at arrogance or rules in the past, moved with quiet awareness. Arrived last, his usual swagger tempered. His posture was different, shoulders squared not in arrogance but in controlled confidence. The humiliation of the Chow Hall, combined with the rigorous training and Riley's subtle mentorship, had begun to reshape him. His movements were more deliberate, his awareness sharper. He glanced toward Riley, and this time there was no smirk, no challenge in his eyes, only a flicker of respect. It was not yet complete admiration, but it was the beginning of understanding the depth of her experience and authority. Riley began the morning exercises with minimal instruction. Her voice was calm, precise, and firm. Awareness, control, cooperation, mistakes will happen. Learn from them or you will repeat them. Today you move as a unit. Observe your partner, adapt, anticipate. The recruits lined up, pairing off as before, and the obstacle course exercises began. Riley walked among them silently, cataloging every movement, every hesitation, every sign of improvement or struggle. Paired again with Sergeant Hunter, navigated the course more smoothly than before. He communicated clearly, observed his surroundings, and adjusted his pace to match Hunter's guidance. When Hunter provided subtle instructions, responded without resistance or argument. Riley noted the change carefully. His arrogance was still present but controlled. His confidence was becoming effective because it was now guided by awareness and preparation. For Riley, this was a pivotal moment, the first tangible evidence that her approach was working. Midway through the course, Riley introduced a situational exercise. Recruits had to carry weighted packs through a simulated obstacle scenario while identifying potential hazards placed along the path. Many stumbled at first, their focus scattered. However, remained composed. He identified the obstacles quickly, adjusted his footing, and maintained coordination with Hunter. Riley observed silently, her analytical mind noting micro-adjustments in posture, weight distribution, and timing. He had learned the lesson she had been teaching. Confidence without awareness was useless. After the drill, Riley gathered the recruits in formation. She spoke slowly, deliberately, ensuring every word carried weight. Leadership is not about strength alone. It is about control, observation, and the ability to guide others under pressure. Respect is not demanded, it is earned. Confidence without preparation will fail. Awareness without action is wasted. Combine these and you become capable. Her gaze lingered on. His expression was thoughtful, almost humbled, but his pride had not been destroyed. It had been refined. His transformation was subtle but undeniable. He had begun to internalize Riley's lessons, demonstrating patience where he had previously rushed, awareness where he had previously ignored, and cooperation where he had previously tried to dominate. He approached Riley after the briefing, his voice steady, his posture controlled. "Ma'am," he said, "thank you for showing me the right way. I understand now." The words were simple, but they carried weight. Riley's expression softened slightly, acknowledging the significance of the moment without overt approval. The rest of the day continued with increasingly complex exercises designed to challenge teamwork, observation, and adaptability. Recruits moved with greater cohesion, guided by Riley's calm authority and subtle corrections. Mistakes were corrected swiftly but without humiliation, reinforcing lessons without creating fear. Once impulsive and reckless, became a model of cautious confidence. Other recruits followed his example, inspired by the transformation they observed. Riley's mentorship was quiet but powerful, her influence shaping behavior through demonstration rather than verbal commands alone. By evening, the recruits were exhausted but alert, their muscles sore and minds sharpened. Riley gathered them one last time for reflection. "Today you learned more than drills," she said, her voice calm but resonant. "You learned to anticipate, you learned to observe, you learned to respect your peers, your environment, and yourself. The lessons will continue, but this is the foundation. Build on it. Remember, skill without control is useless. Power without precision is dangerous. Confidence without awareness is arrogance." Standing slightly apart, reflected on the journey he had. The humiliation, the controlled corrections, and the rigorous training had changed him. He no longer saw Riley as an untouchable officer to provoke. He saw her as a master of skill, precision, and leadership. He realized that the lessons she imparted were not just about physical strength. They were about life, discipline, and understanding the consequences of every action. As the recruits filed back to their quarters, Riley watched quietly. Her eyes lingered on, now moving with measured confidence. The transformation was subtle but real. The arrogance that had once defined him had been tempered by experience, discipline, and guidance. He had earned respect through observation and effort, and he had begun to internalize the principles that Riley had lived by throughout her SEAL career: awareness, precision, patience, and control. The base settled into evening quiet, shadows stretching across the training grounds. Riley allowed herself a moment of reflection. Leadership, she thought, was not about domination. It was about influence. It was about shaping the minds and actions of others through example, observation, and subtle guidance. His journey had begun with arrogance and ended with understanding. The other recruits had observed, learned, and adjusted. The seeds of discipline, respect, and awareness had been planted. As she walked to her quarters, Riley knew the work was far from over. Training was a continuous process, and each recruit's development would unfold over time. But she allowed herself a quiet sense of accomplishment. Today, she had demonstrated the power of calm, precise authority. Today, she had shown that skill, awareness, and discipline could shape behavior without anger or spectacle. And most importantly, she had transformed not only a reckless recruit but an entire group, leaving a lasting impression that would guide them for the rest of their training and beyond. The night fell, but the lessons remained. Would never forget the controlled storm of skill and precision that was Riley Carter. He had been challenged, corrected, and transformed. The other recruits, too, had witnessed a model of leadership that transcended orders and rank. Riley's presence, quiet but formidable, had left its mark on all of them, a mark that would endure long after the obstacle course, the mess hall confrontation, and the long days of training were behind them. For Riley, the mission had been accomplished. Authority had been established, respect had been earned, and discipline had been instilled, not through intimidation but through precision, patience, and the calm mastery of skill. The storm she carried within her, honed through years as a SEAL, had reshaped the base, one recruit at a time. And as the lights dimmed across the base, she knew that the lessons she imparted today would resonate far beyond these walls, leaving a legacy of awareness, discipline, and quiet power.